All right. Looks like we're good to go. Today on the For the Love of Sports podcast, I have Mark. See, look at that. You made me mess up your first name now. I can Mark Hodgkin. I was too focused on the no S. Mark Hodgkin. There we go. I'm done saying your name. EVP
Perfect.
of Product Innovation at TicketSocket, co-host of the Sports Leadership Podcast. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this chat down here in Florida. Obviously, another beautiful day as we kind of live through quarantine life. But all in all, good stuff.
We'll see how it goes. I also love all the plants you have in your house. I can't have that many because I kill them all, but it's a nice
My wife
background,
keeps
man.
these alive. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of comments in the background. I'm out here in our. I don't have a permanent office at home. I'm doing work from home, but make it out here to the sunroom, and yeah, it's not a bad little ambiance around here.
I like it, man. It's nice. It's good to have some plants around. But Mark, first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
Wow, that is a good question. I mean, I
Thank you.
think for me, it's almost like I have to think about that because it's just been part of what I've enjoyed and spent time with since I was so little. Really earliest memories were kind of starting to watch ESPN and the teams that I grew up loving. I started really with the Atlanta Braves, watching them on TBS. Even though I'm from Rhode Island, less than an hour away from Fenway Park, but for us, the Braves were on TV because they were on TBS, and Nesson, which had the Red Sox game, was a $10 extra a month thing that my parents didn't do. So kind of grew up with them. But to get your question, I guess it's always just been there, and it's until now. I love the competition of it. I've always been drawn to the college space. That's really what kind of gets my juices going. Hearing the crowd, and there's something about a campus and how it intersects with great athletics and people coming together. And it's silly when you really break down what you're rooting for when it comes to teams and stuff. I have a friend who says you're basically rooting for laundry at this point,
Yeah,
which there's something to, but I think there's also, just that level of familiarity you have with teams you grow up with players you grow up with, and all those kind of things. And obviously competition is awesome, especially when it's, not low stakes, but we're not talking life and death stuff.
hmm
We're in the fun section of the world, at least for the most part, where we're wins and losses are not life and death, which is great. So you can have that competition, you can be enjoying it, but at the end of the day, nobody's dying, nobody's hurting others.
Exactly. It's sports for as much money, time, effort, energy a lot of people around the world put into them. It's a child's game, right? Like I
Right.
grew up playing t-ball, and now I just watch guys get paid millions of dollars to play baseball, and I think it's well deserved. Obviously, again, there's money in the sport, so good for them. But it's always
Hmm.
just it's very interesting as well to see how exactly it all works out. I really like your point of laundry, especially when it comes to college sports. I think again, that opportunity to bring people together. I mean, the Big House, the Horseshoe. I mean, there's these places where they can fit 110,000 people in one place, and they routinely do it. I know
Right.
in the middle of a Saturday in Michigan, in Ohio, when it's December. They routinely put 110,000 people in these places outdoors, and it's incredible. And I really think it really speaks to how passionate people are about sports. And, I think college it's that extra layer, because I knew so many people who didn't care about sports at all. And then they go to places like Syracuse, and then they start rooting for the team, and they're paying attention to every game, and they're doing all the things that comes with it, Syracuse basketball school. So it's always very interesting to me to see kind of how that works. And speaking of college, I don't have this question for everybody, but you're a particular subject, so I'm very excited to ask it. Mark, is Texas back?
But no, I don't think
Okay.
so. And I always joke that I went to school there when before Texas had to be back.
Yes.
It was obviously a good time to be there. I intersected with so many great players. From Vince Young came in the same class as me, and that special season was my senior year.
Oh,
Um, and had the fortune of being out at the Rose Bowl for that game, which is just a once in a lifetime
you
opportunity.
were there? Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah, yeah. Went out with my dad. He got me tickets. It was a special year. We kind of knew it was coming all off season. I mean, I think nationally, people look at that team and say, you know, they got lucky. They lose that game 8 out of 10 times. They're playing the best team of all time. in USC, but for us who kind of were around it and had seen what Vince could bring to the table the year
Mm-hmm.
before, there was a huge amount of confidence about like our friends going out there. We're just like, we've taken on all comers this year. They won their championship game 70-3, which never happens. And Vince was a transcendent player who had the ball in his hands every single play. So it was really exciting to be out there. And I would say we weren't surprised when it happened, because we got used to what he brought to the Magic to the field every week. But I looked at and the funny part is my wife is a Texas A&M grad. We met in school, but she went to college in Aggie land, and we were comparing the last decade, and unfortunately, it's not even close. The Aggies have us badly, and against stronger competition, I think it's safe to say. Big 12 is obviously a great league, but A&M is in the SEC, so. One of these days, I'm hoping we'll be back, but unfortunately, we've been one of the big underachievers for a long time. But I think it's coming together.
I apologize if I brought up some bad memories there, but it sounds like you went to the good ones, and I think that's important. And I think I'll be honest, every single person that I've ever met that went to UT Austin, I ask them this question just because I think it's fun, but also because let's be honest, like I hate the Yankees, but baseball is better when the Yankees are good. It's just one of those things where. Maybe the Patriots that dynasty was a little too long. 20 straight years of being good is frustrating, but it's just one of those things where these blue bloods, these teams that have been around, the Steelers, let's call it, it's just sports are better when there's a villain too. And whether you like Texas or not, they're not really one of those teams that a lot of people are like, I could do with them, I could do without them. And they're usually one of those teams that it's kind of, polarizing, I guess. And I rooted for Texas in that championship game. That game was that iconic image of Vince Young running into the end zone seared into my memory, and I had no rooting interest.
He was something else, and that's a good point. And Crystal Conte was the athletics director, outstanding athletics director that Texas was fortunate to get from TCU. He said something like that fairly recently of like, we are the Goliath, and people kind of made fun of, well, how did that story end? Obviously not real well for Goliath, but he's right. He can't embrace the underdog role. We have to, a school like that has really no excuses not to get it done. And I think that it's healthy to embrace that. I think it's an interesting dynamic there. Obviously there's high expectations. And in college, I feel like not every team. I feel like there's about 25 teams who, to their core fans, think they should win huge every year. And obviously, mathematically, it's just not possible. What Alabama's done is preposterous in the last decade. Yeah. And Clemson is, right there too. So not everybody can do that. But there's about probably 20 fan bases who think they should if everything comes together from USC to Texas to Michigan to Penn State to Florida State, a few other schools that haven't been there in a while. So. It's fun. I hope we get to settle some things on the field in the fall.
I hope so too. I'm very excited for that. And with you're talking about it a little bit before, and I guess we can kind of touch upon it now. If there's one sport that I don't really want to watch without fans is college football, because the fans, as you said before, again, 110,000 people are packed into these stadiums in certain places. The energy, I can feel it through my TV. Like, it's not even a question, especially these big games, these rivalry games. I feel like I could watch NFL without fans. I don't think that would be as impactful, but college sports, specifically football without fans, I just don't, I'd still watch it because it's football, right? But I feel like it just wouldn't be the same. And you living in it, going to a huge school like that and then also working there, how do you feel about that, potential?
Yeah, I guess I have more perspective on this from the years I spent at the Big East and the American Conference. And we talked about it a lot, even there, that how important it was for schools to have a full house and to build stadiums, frankly, that fit the kind of fan base. When Tulane came into our conference, they came out from having played in the Superdome with like 72,000 seats. It was very hard to even fill half. And a half empty stadium just doesn't translate well on TV. It looks, you just don't have the energy. It just doesn't feel right. That 3:30 game on CBS in the SEC is always, never see an empty seat, and it just feels different on TV. I think it would be very difficult to have those games without crowds. It would obviously not feel like college football. That kind of community element of the whole campus, and that was so special to have when going to a school that had had football so prominently, that the feeling in the air every Saturday, and it just overtakes campus. I was in Austin for business last November, and it just engulfs the whole city, and it's not going to be the same if that's just on TV. And I think there's dynamics in the college game of, if there's not kids on campus going to school, it's going to be very hard to even play the games, let alone play them without crowds. So there's a lot we got to sort out.
Yes, there's a lot. And hopefully, again, everything figures itself out within the next few weeks, few months, however long it takes. But just, man, I love baseball more than anything, but I don't think I could go through a winter without football. I think that would be the hardest, because at least in summer I can go outside. In the winter up here in the Northeast, it's not too easy. Quite like it is down in Florida. But let's go back to your story a little bit. So at the same, after Texas, you went to Bryant University. You were getting your master's, and you were also the director of athletic marketing while you're there. How does that work? Because director of athletic marketing sounds like a full-time job, and getting your master's, I have some friends who did it. It's not very easy.
Well, it was a full-time job. It was definitely, I would say, the good folks in the athletics department had generous naming conventions for the position. I was a GA, it was director of marketing. So I was responsible for all game day promotions, increasing attendance. So I was a GA. So I had the opportunity to live at Bryant and take classes for free, as long as I would get a basic stipend and then do basically a 9 to 5. Well, 9 to 5s don't exist in college, but college sports, but work full time and then go to class, which was at night, to get my MBA. So it was a great opportunity because, one, I never really thought about going back to get my to do grad school. It just wasn't kind of in the thinking. I wanted to work in sports, and had a great opportunity at Bryant. They had a few positions. One was an internship for sports information. That's the one I originally went for. They said, we already have somebody else for that, but we'd like to see you do the marketing, and we'll give you some sports to do SID work for. So I did sports information for the softball team, the swimming team, a few others, and also did the marketing side of things, game day promotions. And then, because we were a small department at that point, a Division II school, we had plenty of opportunities to work in fundraising. We set up a corporate sponsorship program. I was very young, so this wasn't like hardcore negotiating, but signed on Dunkin' Donuts to be a sponsor of us for the first time, and took care of all that. So it was an awesome experience on a few levels. One, because Bryant's a very special school. President Makeley, who just retired, did an unbelievable job taking that from basically a small commuter school that didn't have very high academic standards in the early 90s to a university. They went from college to university. We went from Division II to Division I athletics, and just built a beautiful campus. And the people who were there were amazing. And the senior leadership in the athletics department today is still the same as it was when I left, which is stunning for the space, and especially a school that size. So I had great people around, and I also learned a little bit of everything. You were doing stuff from traveling with the team to really getting to know the coaches to doing, working the Black and Gold Town, which is our fundraising thing. You just had exposure to every part of the college athletics business. It wasn't like Texas, because it's Division II school in Rhode Island, so it's not like that. And it was fine, because if you had that same job at UT, you'd have an outstanding opportunity to network, and you'd have a great resume item, but you might not have a chance to touch all those different parts of the business and all those different things that they have for other people to work on them. So you'd never be doing them. So in that case, it was just a really good opportunity to I say I got my grad degree in business management, but I got a grad degree in college sports, just because of how much I got to do and learn.
That is awesome, man. And you make a really good point. If you're going to Texas, there's, as you said, somebody else is doing that Dunkin' Donuts deal. Somebody else is doing all these little things. You'll probably be siloed into one place, which makes sense. Again, the size of the operation at Texas is a little different, but just the opportunity to also be at a school that's transitioning. I'm excited to kind of mirror that later on in the conversation, when going from the Big East to the AAC and being a part of that as well. So that's very interesting. So all of that, I like the way you put it. You got 2 masters essentially while you were there, which is very important, which then can allow you to go to places like Boston College, where you spend some time, and then eventually make it to the Big East. So Boston College to the Big East, so you got your Boston College, I guess, is technically like your first full, not to say what you were doing at Bryant wasn't full time, but this is kind of your first foray out of
Yeah, it
college
was
in the sense that you're not learning anymore.
right. And I
Worded
actually,
horribly, so I apologize for all of
no,
that. But
not at all. I ended up actually going up there before my last semester was over at Bryant. I had an opportunity. I had met Jamie DiLoretto, who was an associate AD for external up at Boston College at a networking event while I was at Bryant. And we just stayed in touch. And at one point, he said, we have this new position. It's overseeing BCEagles.com. This is back in 2007, 2008. So this is before most schools had like a website guy. So CBS, who ran their website, was going to pay, half this salary, and it was a 1-year position. It was an internship basically. And I would split my time between the communications office and the external office, and learn about, from the guys at CBS and figure out the college athletic website stuff. And I made that decision to kind of do that because I knew I did want to eventually get to a bigger kind of pool, or at least try it. So they say, okay, I could spend 2.5 years working at Bryant, or I could do 2 years at Bryant and a year up at Boston College and see where that goes. And I think that was what opened up the door, obviously, to the Big East. At that point, the Big East, BC was a former member. They left the conference, I guess, 5 or 6 years earlier. There were some hard feelings. I was definitely not allowed to wear any of my old BC swag anywhere near anyone at the Big East. But a lot of people had good relationships. Chris Cameron, who was another guy I worked for, called down to John Paquette, who was our head of communications at the Big East. And basically, they were starting the same kind of thing. They had a guy who was running the website, Ben Fairclaw. He was my boss, and he was getting promoted to kind of a more external, big picture role. And they wanted somebody to just do the website. And, at that point, we were cutting up highlights of Big East football games and doing, obviously, the Big East tournament was our big thing of the year. So I would kind of rode that wave of I didn't go to school for technology or websites or designers, or I'm not an engineer. I was just kind of in the right place at the right time to see that there was going to be this new area of college sports where it's focused on digital and new media. So, by the time I left Boston College, Twitter was just kind of becoming a thing. I remember debating it up there, like, is this even worth it? Is this going to be around in a year? It seems so funny now, but that was kind of I took an opportunity to work at BC because of a person that I knew and wanted me to be there. And, then it kind of just perfect timing that the Big East opened up, and it was in my hometown, Providence, Rhode Island. So, the location was amazing for me because, in the college sports space, you don't have a ton of flexibility in geography. It's hard to just say I want to be in one space, especially if it's the Northeast, because it's it's not a college hotbed by any stretch. But BC is a pretty big school, and it was a chance to work in the ACC, and then obviously the Big East was an amazing thing to be a part of, having grown up kind of in the footprint of it.
Yeah, and you make a really great point. I mean, obviously there's a bunch of colleges up here, but when in terms of college sports, you're really not going to get anything like you would down south. I mean, I went to Rutgers, and I was at Rutgers when they were like top 15 in the nation. So I think we there's some people there. It was fun, but yeah, other than that, I think I was a part of maybe like 2 games that were close to sold out while I was at Rutgers. So it's nothing crazy. And now obviously we know how great they are at football. So we're crossing our fingers for the next couple of years. But no, you make a really good point in the geography, but then also the opportunity to learn the digital aspect. Again, this is 2008, 2009 timeframe where Twitter is just coming out. If you look back at some of those really early tweets that people were sending out, it's like Steph Curry is like, hey, I think I'm going to go grab some lunch soon. And now you can kind of see what it's been able to grow into and how it's been able to change over the time, which I think, again, kind of, as I was talking about with Brian, as you were kind of there there has been a transition from university or college to university, Division II, Division I, as you were talking about. This over here with the Big East to the AAC and learning and understanding. I mean, you're going through multiple transitions through this, whether it's, the company that you're working for, technically the, what you're learning and how the internet and digital is working. I mean, how much fun was it to be a part of something like this over the span of, 7 to 8 years to really learn how the internet works? And then by the time you're, leaving in 2016, you're able to really see what I mean, we'll call it internet, what, 3.0, I guess, at this point,
Yeah.
whatever it's been. Like, what was that transition like? And then we'll, I guess, or do you want to talk about the transition from the Big East to the AAC first? We got two
Well, they're all,
conversations, so whichever
yeah,
you prefer.
and they're kind of intertwined,
Look at that.
because I think everybody understands kind of what drove a lot of that realignment, and it was actually only a few months after I got to the Big East we added TCU as a member. Most people forget that ever even happened. That
Was
the
Boise
TCU was in
State?
the
When was
that was
Boise
about a
State?
year or two later.
Okay,
And
because I remember
it's
when
funny.
that happened, I was like, "What the hell's going on? This makes no sense."
Yeah, it was very strange. So the realignment angle was, they had just gone through this change in the early 2000s that lost Miami and Virginia Tech and BC, and then around 2009 things started bubbling up again. We had a strange layout as a conference. By that point, we had 16 teams, 8 of which played football, and 8 of which didn't play football, including Notre Dame, who obviously plays football, but just not in the conference. So we had this big, you could kind of say, wobbly organization by that time, where you were realizing with the TV deals that were coming up, and this is what kind of ties into the digital and the changing landscape. But this is all run by television networks and the opportunity to get new TV deals, and these deals that the conferences negotiate were starting to come up, and they realized, one of the ways to expand what you're going to get and get a more lucrative contract might be to rearrange your membership, whether that's adding somebody or, in the case of the early adapters of this who started their own networks like the Big Ten, what they are trying to do is get into the right cable markets. That's obviously what got Rutgers into the Big Ten. Maryland obviously represented the DC market, and that came about a little bit later. But for us, it was at that point, and it's really hard to almost go back to this and think about this, but at that point in history, the Big East and the ACC were very close as far as competitively. The Miami and Florida State thing hadn't taken hold in that conference as much as it had. Virginia Tech had done outstanding, but Clemson wasn't anything like what they are now. Florida State was just coming off a time where they might have been like that, but things started moving around almost immediately, like adding TCU, and then the big shockwave was when Syracuse and Pittsburgh left, and that was probably about a year into my time there, and that was just a stunning. It came out in the middle of the night. I remember not even knowing about it until I guess the office on the next Saturday. We go in to watch the games, and it had just popped up out of nowhere. And the same night, actually, the founder of the Big East, Dave Gavitt, he was a former Providence athletics director and coach. He passed away the same night, and his son worked with us, was our head of basketball. So it was a disorienting time. And Syracuse was about as big as it gets. They'd been there since pretty much the early days, and Pittsburgh had been there since I think '82. Big part of what made the Big East special. And then once that happened, there started to be all sorts of other dominoes and things going on, and that would fill up 2 or 3 podcasts. I gave a guest lecture at UCF recently where I went through it. I had to go back and study up on all the moves and stuff. There's so much happening from 2010 to 2013, which is when we made that change. So fast forward to kind of what that was like. By the end of 2012, our commissioner had been removed. We'd lost, I think at that point, we'd lost Syracuse, Pittsburgh, Notre Dame. We'd added a few, like you said, Boise State and San Diego State for football. We'd added in UCF, and we'd added in SMU and Houston, but they weren't there yet. And then the real big drop was when the Catholic 7 schools left, the 7 basketball playing schools left in early 2013. And at that point, we only had 4 members who are just going to be with us in the future, so not counting the ones that are coming in or the ones that are on the way out, like Rutgers or Louisville. So it was really uneasy for a long time. At that point, when that happened, our existence wasn't guaranteed by any stretch. There's been conferences that have gone out of business. The Southwest Conference, the WAC kind of did. They got at least really, really changed. So at that point, we had to pick up the pieces. One, negotiate a new TV deal because it was up, and we had nobody left, at least nothing similar to what we had before. So we had to kind of pick up the pieces and put together a new conference, which was a huge challenge for Commissioner Resco and for everybody else on the team to kind of, one, make sure the teams who were coming didn't turn back. Teams like Houston or SMU or that could have ended up in the Mountain West or even back to Conference USA or whatever. We had to secure them. We had to secure a television deal to at least get some footing underneath us. And then we had all the branding and renaming and coming up with new logos and getting those to the schools, and not to mention just dealing with so many new teams, which is a difference. A lot of people at the Big East have been there for a long time and worked with the same people at the same schools for a long time. There's a Northeast predominantly conference, and now we're 2 in Texas, 2 in Florida, Oklahoma, everywhere in between seemingly. East Carolina added, Tulane added. We were everywhere. Memphis came in. So yeah, I forget the original question, but it was a
I remember
it was a wild time to go through all those changes.
And so with all those changes, the one thing, I mean, so essentially the Big East just turned into the AAC, and then there was a new Big East that was created for the Catholic 7 schools, and then they grabbed like Butler and Creighton and threw them in there as well, correct? Just to make sure, because it's kind of like the New Orleans Hornets, who became then the Charlotte Hornets, and then they became the Bobcats, and now the Hornets are there again. It's like they're 2 different franchises, but they have the same name, just so I have that correct with the Big East, right?
That's exactly right. And actually,
I think it's still the exactly same way right? I don't know. I feel like I kind of messed something up along the way.
Technically, believe it or not, unless this has changed since I left a couple of years ago, the American Conference technically was founded in 1979, which is when the Big East was founded, and then reconstituted in 2013.
Huh.
I don't know why that's exactly how it works, but what the conference did was, once we lost those schools, we realized, and I think Mike Oresco and the leadership and the schools decided that what we were going forward with wasn't really the Big East. We had the name, we owned it, we had the contract with Madison Square Garden, but I think it was an awareness on our part that, let's not try to fool anybody. This isn't the Big East. It's not going to play, and so they sold over the rights to the name, the logo, the history, and the contract with Madison Square Garden to a new group that was headed by those 7 schools. And it was Creighton, Xavier, and Butler were added. They've added, obviously, since they've got UConn back. So they started up a new league. They were run by, for that first part, I don't think they had their first staff member until middle of that summer. I remember being at NACTA and dealing with the new schools that were coming in, and I did licensing. So they were like, hey, I need approval to get the Big East logo on a Xavier t-shirt that I want to sell day one. And I'm like, well, I work for the Big East, but I don't work for the Big East that you're going to be in. And it was a very strange kind of, it was kind of a weird place to be, kind of balancing that. So that is how it started. So we went home on Friday. I think it actually was a Friday. And the Monday we came back, it was technically the American, changed the logo on the door and changed the stationery. And, we had to transfer the management of the website, obviously the domain, all those kind of things. We had to come up with our own website. I remember working with the guys at Sidearm, and we put together a site. We didn't have the name of the conference until April, May. It was late. So we built the conference, as Conference X. I think that was what the contract said. We had to, once we found out it was going to be the American, we could kind of guess that our colors are going to be red, white, and blue. And then we, kind of adjusted as we went, and then we launched the site on time and everything. But there's so many of those kind of little things you have to figure out to make it happen. And I don't know the last time a conference kind of did that exact same thing, where they kind of came out in some ways out of thin air.
Out of thin air, with at least the structure was in place. At least you guys all got to keep your jobs, or at least I hope everybody got to keep their jobs in some capacity, and that's capable. And so you were talking about it a little bit before with the transition of the digital age and the rise of kind of digital creation and content really did go hand in hand with the old Big East falling and then the new AAC coming in. And that transition almost aligns perfectly, as you were talking about before, with TV rights and how they pretty much run everything for college sports. When it came to branding, especially, with you being, pretty integrated into that part of the conference, how the heck did you handle all of that and getting people to understand? Because I like the point you made before, like, this isn't the Big East. We can call it the Big East, but everyone's going to know it's not the Big East. Syracuse isn't here. Pitt's not here. Who the heck is SMU? I mean, we only know them from the death penalty. Like,
Right, right.
why are we even going to bother? So how do you even, like, if you're heading up that or a part of that team, where do you start?
Yeah, and we had a lot of outside, consultants who came up with the name and the logo and things like that, and a lot of that was done kind of outside of our doors, at least myself. And then we kind of got the results and said, okay, we're the American Conference. Here's our logo. Let's go forward with that. And I think we did talk about the name quite a bit when we were thinking about that, and we realized we're not going to have any directional. That we're not going to be hung up on that. We're not going to have any numbers because obviously that gets wonky. We have the Big 12 with 10 and the Big 10 with 14 and all that stuff. So no numbers, no directions. And we did settle on a very generic name, but one that that kind of encompassed what we were and what we tried to do early on. One of our original, before they kind of went to the Power Six, American Power with the Six, which is their current kind of branding, started after I left, really. But we started up with kind of this American Rising theme, and we tried to make it like, okay, the conference, it's a kind of you had to work it through of kind of trying to say this is a little bit of an aisle of misfit toys. These are It's a little bit cobbled together, but hey, you know what? This is kind of what America is too. We're scrappy. We're an underdog. Or at least we were originally. we came from a lot of different places. Our strength is in our diversity. We have schools from some of the amazing, great cities in America. That was one of the advantages we did notice that we had. That's kind of a double-edged sword in college sports, like you alluded to. The ones that control their market are typically the big guys, the Alabamas, the Floridas, the Texases. The schools that are in pro markets and big TV markets are great because they have that market to deal with, but they're also usually not the big draw, right? Yeah. So, team like Houston has done great things, but they're not ahead of the Texans or the Astros or the Rockets in the scheme of things. Probably not ahead of Texas A&M, and that's just kind of the thing we had to deal with. But we did have great American cities: Philadelphia, Houston, Dallas, Orlando,
New Brunswick for a second. I was there.
Yeah.
I was there during Rutgers transition. It was really weird. I got there where the Big East were pretty okay. My second year there were the AAC, and then I think the next year, if I'm not mistaken, now they're in the Big Ten.
3 conferences in your time there.
It was crazy. It made no sense, and I didn't buy shirts. Like, there was no point in buying a shirt at that point. But it's really interesting. And then I guess from like the digital side, like, how did you take advantage? And I like the idea of great American cities, and that's always going to play very well. But how did you over this period of time then? How did you handle learning all these new digital opportunities? As you said, Twitter. I mean, Facebook was there, but I mean, how there was it? The rise of Instagram, just video content. How did you then learn how to do all this while everything else was going on?
I think that's kind of the nature of the beast with the digital space, that, you could go to school for it, but then a few years later, that's going to be all kind of out the window, and it's going to change so much. So it's about being out there. What I liked about the conference a lot was the interactions you have with the schools, right? And you pick up stuff from so many different great folks from around. So that would help you keep in touch. And that's one of the things we went to the American. We started doing a little bit more aggressive in how we worked with the schools as far as a marketing standpoint. But one of the things for digital, we realized that could be a driver for our brand awareness. And Mike is a television guy, Mike Rusco, our commissioner, but he understood that we needed to make digital a priority, and he carved out a budget for us to really become content creators. So we thought about what we could do when you're at a conference. It's a lot different than being a school, mostly based on access. There's also a lot of factors about equality, or not equality, but not showing. You don't want to have 10 pieces of content on Houston and 2 on SMU. Yeah. And people get very touchy about that. Everything from the PSAs that the videos have to have. So we realized, okay, we're not going to have the access to the campuses, but we can build out a green room studio, and we can build out a command center where we're taping or recording every game, digitizing it, and then what we tried to do was we just tried to experiment. We said, let's see, we used to be putting them on the video highlights on YouTube. And then we said, on Twitter, they're getting a lot more views. Then we ended up, when we had more manpower, we were going to still put them on YouTube because that's a great historical archive. And it's just it's the second biggest search engine in the world. So we looked at it as really a way of, we were going to try to spread the brand as far as possible. We started a digital network for live games. One of the dynamics that changed in this time and really was driven by the conference networks was these things that are called third tier rights, which are basically the contests that don't get picked up by the major television networks. So, volleyball games and softball games and soccer games and things like that. Baseball is big for this, but the conference networks like the SEC and the Big Ten said, we're going to take all that and we're going to put it on our television network. And before that, it was really those third tier rights would go back to the schools and they could do what they wanted with them. And that's why companies like New Line, who I did eventually work for, would be able to monetize those and build a really great, pay-per-view type model that lasted until, the last couple of years. But for the American, what we decided, we weren't going to try to monetize those as well. We thought it was more important for the initial time to make them available and to use it as a branding opportunity. So the other decision we made on this was we were going to hire professionals to produce them. That was a strategic decision because on one hand, you're going to pursue school productions of them getting set up so they can do these at their own, which is what a lot of the schools are doing now. But we wanted to make sure they were top of the line, really well done. And we want to make them free. So we were going to put them on our platform, but not require signups or payments. We thought we could get more exposure and we could make it more available. And another big thing for this is recruiting. How can you make it easy to see the content for parents and fans and recruits? So we saw just a lot of different digital outlets to build the brand and to develop it. Like you said, the space is changing so much rapidly that you just try to be as flexible as you can. That's why we built the studio the way we did. More like we have a virtual studio. It was a green screen. We invested in putting together great graphics packages and even things like you can do really good fake desks and podiums and stuff like that are really getting there. And then we worked with companies like LiveView who did transmission of video feeds over IP lines and cell phone lines. So you could basically take a live video anywhere, whether you're in like a park. And we did these for, conference championships like cross country that we'd never been able to do before. So you have to find the right kind of partners who can kind of fit the gaps that you're going to need. And it was just really fun to try to pull those all together and develop them. And we felt like we were making a difference because it was the first introduction anybody had to the conference, and we controlled the message.
And how do you feel that went? Because I agree with you, especially with this new conference. If you have all these extra sports, let's call them, extra being anything other than football and basketball, essentially.
Right.
How much money are they really going to make if you put them, you have to create that TV network. There's so much stuff that you have to do. How in your opinion, from the branding and the digital perspective and then the impact, how did making all those for free help the conference as a whole, especially in those first few years?
Yeah, I think, I don't have a firm, fact that I could say that made it for sure. It made a huge difference. Our membership, our viewership was solid. What we realized, it was very solid for certain sports. And this was kind of like a learning aspect of our league where baseball was gigantic for our numbers we couldn't even believe how big they were for Houston baseball, East Carolina baseball, UCF baseball. These were like baseball powerhouses, and that's a sport that doesn't get a ton of play on traditional television. So that was really big, and I do think it allowed us to take a breath and explain what we were about. I think it was the right decision. I think you can always look back and say, should we have been investing some of that in getting the schools ready to produce? Obviously, since this has happened, the new TV deal with ESPN requires the schools to produce a lot of content, which is a big, sometimes under discussed aspect of these television contracts. it's not easy to produce a quality broadcast on campus. It's just some places have amazing student operations. St. John's had one when they were in our league. So a crazy good job. But students are fickle, and it's hard to get the right ones. Then some schools just don't have the academic profile for it, right? Like it's hard to get schools that have certain kinds of student bodies interested in spending hours manning a camera. They're just, it's not for everybody. And you have to have schools with big communications departments and ones that want to do that. So that's the one thing that I think, sometimes I wonder, should we have done that? Should we have invested in that earlier? But hindsight's 50-50 or 20-20. And I think it did help us get the brand out there and people to understand. Because when you're starting this, it's like, you have to realize, the things move so slow in college. Things are like, fan bases are almost this generation by generation thing. And the example I use is like UCF, down here in Orlando, they do an unbelievably good job, and they're so good on the field, but it takes so long to be kind of like considered a blue blood, or considered like all the kids who go to UCF, most of them come from like Gator or Seminole families, and that's where they grew up. And I tell the guys who I know there, like, who are students there, and they work with our office at TicketSocket, and say, you're probably going to be another generation or two that before that really sets in, of people knowing that. So the first question, I guess, is day one, you have to not take it for granted that people aren't going to know who you are. People aren't going to try telling who was in what league, even some of the bigger conferences. So let alone when you're having a brand new name and a logo nobody's ever seen, it's a lot of work just to get noticed. And I think it did in the grand scheme of things help us get our message out.
Yeah, and I mean it worked in terms of, UCF 2017 national champions, if I'm not mistaken. East Carolina won baseball a few years back. So I mean, again, like you had some sort of impact, at least bringing these teams together. And that period of time, I remember just being a big sports fan, and specifically a college sports fan when it comes to basketball and football. There was like a 2-year period where I had no idea who was in what league. Like I knew Duke was in the ACC, and North Carolina was there too. After that, I mean, you could pretty much throw a dart at a dartboard and you might have a better chance. Again, like Syracuse being in the ACC, it still is weird, honestly. Like I
don't just started realizing that Maryland is in the Big Ten.
Yeah,
and that's only probably because it wasn't. Almost all the other ones had some impact on our league. That one wasn't, but I still think of them sometimes as the ACC, and that's what 8 years later, 6 years later, whatever it is.
It makes no sense. But again, I'm glad we spent a little bit of time on that part of your career, because again, there's just so much stuff. And as you said, we could probably do another 3 episodes on just kind of what was happening there during that 3-year stretch, but we'll move on. We will move on. So then after leaving the AAC in 2016, New Lion, Mark A. Hodgkin Consulting, got your name right that time. Look at me. And the Sports Leadership Podcast essentially all started right around the same time. I know what it takes to run a podcast, so kudos to you on that one. Becoming a consultant in some fashion, I mean, that means you're at least doing something extra on top of your full-time job. So that's 2 things. And the New Line, which would be your, full-time, quote unquote position. What was it like? And I guess, why was this the right time to try and do just a little bit of everything at once?
Yeah, some of the thinking about it is the conference track can be a little narrow. It's sometimes hard to translate it to other areas. And I wasn't sure it was going to be something I was going to do the rest of my life. And I had an interesting opportunity with New Lion, because they were looking for somebody to help them on the technology side who wasn't a technologist. They're like, we want somebody who's been a user of our program, and we want you to come, and we'll teach you about technology, and we'll teach you about product development, and we'll do all those things. So that was a really intriguing opportunity to kind of broaden the horizon. And what I liked about the conference so much was, like I said, working with so many different partners in different schools. And that's what you could do at New Lion, was, interact with a great stable of schools that we had, from Oklahoma to Clemson to Duke to North Carolina and Nebraska and Big 12. So I was able to do that and kind of share with internally what SIDs and digital guys at schools would be looking for, and then on my side pick up a lot of stuff. And some of the other projects, I had some time between when I left the American and when I joined New Line. I did a few freelance projects. I've always tried to keep a few projects going on the side to keep myself sharp and stay connected. And the network is just really important. And I've always been intrigued by that. I haven't been afraid to put in a little extra work. And when I went to New Line, it was a little bit more of a 9 to 5 job than the conference is. I mean, the conference, you have somebody on TV almost every night, and you have something going on everywhere. Because you have 12 or 16 or 10 or how many ever teams we have at any given moment. There's just a lot of those. Saturdays are a full work day. Sunday's kind of a catch-up day. You're working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday as well, and then you're responsible in some form. And I was fortunate to have a staff, so I wasn't watching every single game and cutting highlights of every single game. But there's always something going on. So when I had a little bit more time, I'm like, I've known Kevin DeShazo for a long time. I've respected him. I always had an interest in how people work and how people lead. So I said, I'd love to do some kind of podcast. And he goes, well, I've actually had this concept for it for a while. I'm in if you are. And he's like, I already built the logo. I have a website. I have the SoundCloud account. And he's like, if you are okay cutting it up and doing that, like, let's do it. And so we just kind of did. And we've been doing that for 2 years. Not as consistent maybe as we should have been at all times, but life gets in the way sometimes. But it was a great way to kind of think intentionally about interesting ideas. When you're doing stuff like this, you probably know you learn a lot, you expand your network, you are forced to think critically about items, and if you're going to communicate it, you have to give some thought to it. So I thought it was another kind of good opportunity to do kind of as a side hustle, and it's gone really well. We picked it up. It's actually very conducive to the whole kind of quarantine that we're under right now, and going back to get more interviews and talk about issues that affect leaders in the college space, but also the regular sports space. I mean, it's definitely geared towards college because that's what my background is. That's what Kevin's background is. But it's been fun to do it, and it's a way to kind of keep conversations going and keep networks building and again, just think and learn. I always try to learn and pick up things. So the podcast has been great for that.
I love it, man. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I get to talk to people like you doing this. I get to talk to people like Riley. So shout out to him and then Amy. And that's how, it's always fun to see how I get connected with somebody in some capacity. And just, I love learning. That's always been something, especially over the last few years. And just, I've been super curious. So that helps too. I just kind of come up with these questions as we're going along. And it's always just a lot of fun. And so I guess, with that, so the link to the podcast will be in the show notes for anybody out there listening if they want to check that out. Very important. Make sure to go subscribe, review, do all the normal podcast stuff. Everybody knows how it works at this point. But with your time at New Line, how was it to kind of, I guess, relax for a better term, like, not having to work all day Saturday, not having to catch up all day Sunday. And, you say it's 9 to 5, but really games don't start till 7. So it's 9 to 5, you probably eat dinner and then 7 to 11 at that point. So what was it like kind of coming in to the technology side, which again, you were the user of it. And now you kind of, at least you're still getting paid, thankfully, but now it's not nearly as time intensive. You can actually hang out with your family or maybe, do something on the weekends.
Yeah, it opened up more time. It's definitely more time to spend with my wife. Don't have kids, but it's more family-ish time. It's giving me more flexibility in the schedule. It's allowed me to take on kind of those other projects, like I said, the podcast and all that, and just spend more time learning. I mean, I'm a big reader, so that's another thing I do a lot. Is try to read a ton and develop myself that way. But it's still. It's a different skill set. So, you go from being kind of the client, and I joke around with guys I've worked with previously who, were, maybe at Exos Digital who ran the Big East website or Sidearm or ran the American. And I go, this is my penance, for every time I ask you to do something, and why don't you have this product, that then I always have an answer to that and develop it and realize, the business side of things, which I had a bent for and understood from school and things. But, it was a great opportunity to learn about the underlying technology that goes into it. I'm still not a technologist. I'm still, learning how to just hold my own when I'm talking with developers or our product managers and things like that. But yeah, it was nice to have kind of a break and say, hey, Saturdays I can watch whatever game I want. No offense, but I can watch that SEC game at 3:30. I don't have to necessarily watch the game for for our league, and don't have to be in the office, obviously, doing it. So it's been a good thing for a lot of reasons, but I think definitely I don't know if work-life balance is the right exact thing, because I still keep myself pretty busy, but it's a little bit more flexible and a little bit more flexibility. And again, it's kind of like the decision, when I kind of switched tracks to go to Boston College, was how could we, how is it going to open up a few more doors in the future? And I said, there's a lot of technology related vendors in the space. I can still be in the sports world. I can still be talking to people. I can still be there. I can still be in the conversation. But it doesn't have to be at a school. It doesn't have to be at a conference. And the skills that maybe I'm picking up at New Lion and taking the TicketSocket are a little bit more transferable. So it's a balance of trying to stay flexible in your path, and not kind of say, I have to do this for 3 years and I only can work for this company. I can only be there. Having the flexibility, but also then those kind of moments where you have to jump at an opportunity. And I think of the Jamie at BC saying, hey, do you know anything about websites? Would you come be our website guy? I'll figure that out. Yeah, let's figure it out. Or, hey, could you come to New Lion and be our product guy? And I'm like, I don't even know what a product guy is. What is that? Like, okay. Oh yeah, I get it. I can figure this out. Yeah, sure. So I've always tried to be, open for those kind of things that are kind of serendipitous that'll come up and all. And I think that's really important when you're talking about a career. Have the long plan, but don't be afraid to kind of pivot and pick up opportunities. And I think there's always going to be opportunity. I think there's going to be a bunch that come out of this COVID-19 scenario. I don't know what they are yet. I'm trying to figure it out, like everybody else. But I think there's going to be things that come out of this and provide amazing opportunities, and you'll be able to jump at them and figure them out. And some will, and they'll be very successful.
And we're rooting for all those people. Hopefully everyone can get back to work sooner rather than later, once everything is finally safe to go. So with that, I'm definitely curious, with the AAC, Big East, Boston College, it was to a small number of colleges, right? I mean, even with the Big East, when it was 16, 16 is not very many when you're considering how many teams you're capable of working with New Line, how many teams you're capable working with TicketSocket. So what was that aspect of these two jobs like? And we'll get to TicketSocket, I guess, in a second. Yeah. But like, how much more innovation were you able to see across, the country at that point? How much more innovation and more interesting, opportunities came about? Because now, instead of only working with 5, 6, 10, 12 teams, you're now able to work with so many more, and allow you to think, as you were talking about with the podcast, where you can think more critically about things. You can see the ways people do things in schools and around the country. How much more innovation, guess, came from that, I guess, from a personal and a business level from your part?
It's a good question. It's one I actually haven't spent a ton of time thinking about. And I think the last time I did the math at the conference, I think I interfaced with about 37 schools that were either coming and going, didn't get never at the same time. But once you start adding in and all that. But you're right. I mean, New Line was well over twice that many. And they're much more different, right? So even in the Big East, I would always say, like, geez, Louisville and Providence College, like, what do they have in common? Not much as far as the school, the location, the geography, anything, football, non-football. But at New Line, it was, okay, we have Oklahoma and Nebraska, and then we also have Presbyterian and Seminole State College, which is right here in Orlando. That's it's not even an NCAA school. So, they do great stuff, and it's actually been a great partnership with guys like that. But you learn about even more kind of the difference between what the big guys need who have a staff or even a digital staff, and then you deal with schools that, at Seminole State, Kurt Esser is their athletics director, and he was the website guy. He would do the website stuff because it's a small school, and it's different. So the skills, the tools that Oklahoma might need are going to be a little bit different than the ones that Seminole State might need. And I think seeing how the different schools operated and seeing different needs was definitely valuable. And you had to balance it, right? You couldn't just go to those smaller schools and go, yeah, our big product this year, I know it's not going to really help you, but it really helps Nebraska, you know? And, there's obviously decisions that need to be made, but you have to be able to look at all of them and say, we're doing a good job for you.
Yeah. And I think it's just, It's an interesting question, especially being able to then work with so many more schools and see what those opportunities might look like. You make a good point. You can't go to Nebraska and Seminole State and say, "Hey, we have this product. It should work for both of you." Well, not quite. Nebraska is a
Right.
little different. Nebraska owns an entire state on Saturday. Essentially, the whole thing shuts down. And shout out to them. That must be just an incredible time. So
For
moving
sure.
on. So the last 8-ish months you've spent with TicketSocket. What exactly is TicketSocket, and what
Sure.
do you do? I think you're a product guy again, if I'm not mistaken, but now you're
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
innovation side of products. So tell us a little bit about what TicketSocket is and what you do there.
Yeah, TicketSocket's the white label ticketing and event registration platform. So basically, if you think about it, New Line, we did ticketing as well for a certain number of partners. TicketSocket has two different product verticals. One for kind of like general admission, race admissions. So we do obstacle course races and things like that. And then we also have sports clients and attractions clients. And I think our big thing, the one thing that people should know about TicketSocket is it's all based on being white label. So when I mean white label, I mean that if you go to one of our clients and buy tickets from there, you'll really have no idea that you've ever interfaced with the TicketSocket technology. And that was really one of the appealing things that when I was being recruited here, I had a relationship with one of our EVPs. Kill Blake worked at UCF, and I met him there. And it's funny how the world is small. Now that I live in Orlando, it's just the perfect time to work together. But the idea of giving this, well, it's not always schools, but it's any client control of their brand, control of the technology, control their revenue, which has become a really big
Hmm.
thing now with, you see how some of the ticketing companies are handling all the refunds and the canceled events and moved events. What's really appealing about it is that the client has that control. They can either plug into our API and build an entire checkout flow and site just using our technology so they can book and select seats and select time slots. But they control the brand. They control,
Hmm.
you're not sending them to an Eventbrite site or a Ticketmaster site or something where, you're losing the data on the fans. You might have access to it in some form, but, with our platform, you're owning that and you're
Hmm.
controlling it. So, those were things that I say, okay, I know this is a good selling point. I know that people in the market are going to be interested in saying, yeah, I'd like to have control of those things. I'd like to have it look like my brand. I'd like to be able to take that information on our fans, use it intelligently, not have them come back and be marketed, a day later for some event that is not one of my events, which
Hmm.
is how some of the players work. And there's obviously balances of, having a marketplace to put your events, and the idea of having it be exposed to people who might just stumble upon it and want to use it. The flip side is if you're in that marketplace, somebody might be doing that and then see something that sounds better,
Hmm.
and decide to go to a different direction. So that's kind of our premise. We have a variety of different kinds of clients. We have an immersive art client that we work with quite a bit that just has an amazing kind of interactive art gallery. And then we have, we signed a deal with FIBA, FIBA basketball,
Hmm.
to work with them in the next 5 years. Run up to the Olympics and World Cups and qualifiers. So that opens up a ton of doors. But I think, like I said, it's the having a white label solution, which is just really appealing to people in the space, and say, I'm going to control that. I'm going to control data. I'm going to control the revenue. I'm not waiting for somebody else to send us our money. I'm controlling that. And I just think that's really scalable. And I think it does have a great potential. When we get out of this, I think it's going to be even only more appealing once we get games back and once we get attractions back up,
Hmm.
and hopefully that's not too long.
Crossing my fingers, man, just as hard
Yeah.
as you are. And I guess so
Yeah.
with what is going on right now, what are you guys doing, especially from a product innovation standpoint? I mean, this is the time where you usually don't have sports shut off for 2 months. That doesn't ever
Yeah.
happen. And it might be even longer, but probably close
Yeah.
to 3. So how are you taking advantage, for lack of a better term, to innovate the product, make it better, go into those backends where you had all those band-aids and now maybe you actually can build it out properly? Like, what have you guys been doing to make sure that you're, doing something with this time?
That's funny you say that, because that has been one of our focuses of
Yeah.
saying, we can do some stuff and fix that issue, because, when you're dealing with this, and we have clients in Korea and we have clients overseas, so somebody's always got a game going on
Hmm.
normally. So
Yeah.
it's not like even, okay, we can do a maintenance window
Hmm.
and nobody's doing it. But now, hey, we can push these things, we can get this stuff done, because, even if, and the platform hasn't, but even if you were offline for a while, you know, there's no events going on right
Hmm.
now, so it's an opportunity. The flip side is, you've got to be really aggressive, and there's some things I can't give too many details on as
Of
far as
course,
what we're
right.
doing, but we have pivoted a few things to just stuff that wasn't even on the radar a few months ago,
Hmm.
and say, what does our tool do? Look at it and say, okay, what we do time ticketing um, for events that have had long waits. And then by able to do time ticketing, what I mean is you sign up for a time slot and say, I'm coming between 1 and 2. Okay, let's think about what the opportunity is there now. What else might need that? It's not going to be art galleries or attractions or amusement parks, but there might be other kind of companies
Hmm.
that would need that right now with the current situation.
Yeah.
So we've had a few other products that have been kind of on the shelf, that we've been waiting for the right time, and we're pushing through in those, and we're looking for, okay, what we're offering is flexible. That's why we built it this way. It's white label, so that's great. What else can we do? And it just might be a little bit different than thinking about it. So it's not to say that it's a challenging time in a lot of ways, and our clients are suffering. I mean, it's not a good time for anybody in the event ticketing space.
Hmm.
Um, but there are those opportunities. And that's what we're trying to focus on. What are the things we can control? What are the things we can polish up while we're not selling tickets? And then, hey, what is the world look like? Because none of us know when this is going to happen. None of us know when normal, if that's the thing, is ever going to come back, or what's going to change.
Hmm.
So are there some things we can kind of do in the meantime to reapply the technology to companies that are trying to come back online through this pandemic? And maybe it's a whole nother vertical that we haven't explored before, but might be a huge deal for us coming up.
Yeah.
So
And coming up and moving forward,
yeah,
especially as you said,
absolutely.
we don't know what the new normal is going to be, because I don't think, even if we make it back to the old normal, it's going to be a very long time. I don't think it's.
Yeah, and I talk to people every conversation I have, and stuff now is kind of, I always say, so when do you think we're going to be back up and running? And I don't think I've got the same answer twice. And most people don't even venture a guess because it's just so volatile. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how leagues address this. I think there's a lot of smart people trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of money at stake to get it back up. So I think you're going to see some really creative stuff. Hopefully, we can all survive through it and thrive through it.